This episode of Rhizome is brought to you in part by the Synthesis Security Group and Fuzzy Wuzzy Signal Processing, a venture of Ian Swanke. Copyright 2026. All rights reserved.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a totally fascinating and, honestly, a completely unexpected parallel. We're going to look at how ancient Greek priests and modern Pentagon whistleblowers actually manage the exact same problem, a fractured reality. I know, it sounds like the setup to some crazy historical sci-fi novel, but the structural alignments between these two groups are absolutely stunning. So let's just get right into it.
It might sound a bit absurd at first to put mystical ancient priests and modern defense contractors in the exact same sentence. But the truth is, both the ancient mystery schools and the modern framework for unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs, represent pivotal moments where our everyday consensus reality abruptly breaks down.
First things first, let's establish exactly what we mean when we say UAP. We are talking about physical objects operating in restricted airspace that completely defy human manufacture. So we're not talking about stray balloons or weird weather anomalies here. We're focusing purely on how these objects shake the absolute foundation of what our modern defense establishments consider to be technologically possible.
Now, flipping over to the historical side of things, we have the Hierophant. A Hierophant was an ancient priest, quite literally a keeper of the threshold. Their entire job, their whole purpose, was to painstakingly decide who was psychologically and morally prepared to handle profound truths. Because these were truths that, if they were just unleashed on an unprepared public, could entirely destabilize normal civic life.
And that brings us to our very first massive parallel, epistemological gatekeeping. Or, to put it a bit more simply, heavily controlling exactly who gets to know the truth. Both those ancient hierarchies and our modern special access programs shared the exact same ultimate goal. They're trying to manage precisely how much of this fractured reality the public is exposed to, basically to prevent systemic, society-wide panic. Back in antiquity, mystery schools like the Eleusinian or the Hermetic traditions didn't just hand out their sacred doctrines in the town square. Knowledge was strictly compartmentalized through these intense, layered degrees of initiation, and the stakes, they were incredibly high. Revealing these secrets could literally mean exile or even death, and the Hierophants held absolute power over who was actually deemed ready to handle it. And here is the beautiful irony of it all. Our modern bureaucracy perfectly mirrors this ancient, secretive compartmentalization. Instead of temple priests, today we have Unacknowledged Special Access Programs, or USAPs. They hide sequestered information about non-human intelligence and retrieved craft behind immense institutional firewalls that actually exceed standard military classification. So, today's Hierophants, they're the Pentagon and congressional committees, deciding what tiny fragments of truth we're finally ready for.
So, you might be wondering, why go to such extreme lengths to keep a secret? Well, it's because of one terrifying prospect, a moment where consensus reality fractures. The underlying fear motivating both ancient priests and modern intelligence committees is identical. They are absolutely terrified that a sudden, unmanaged public disclosure will induce an ontological collapse, basically a complete breakdown of how society understands the fundamental rules of the world.
Which naturally leads us to ask, what actually happens to the people who witness these phenomena firsthand? What on earth connects a philosopher going through a secret initiation thousands of years ago with a highly trained modern naval aviator encountering the impossible at 30,000 feet? It all comes down to a profound, consciousness-altering ontological shock.
The ancient mystery schools deliberately engineered these wild, high-stress, immersive ritual environments. Initiates would undergo extreme sensory deprivation, followed by intense sacred drama and theatrical illusion. All of this was designed to fundamentally shatter their mundane, everyday worldview.
They weren't there to just memorize facts. They were seeking gnosis, a direct experiential shock that completely rewired their understanding of existence. Fast forward to today, and the trigger is totally different, but the resulting shock? It's exactly the same. Naval aviators are tracking UAPs, performing transmedium travel, moving seamlessly from space to air to water. They're seeing instantaneous acceleration and hypervelocity maneuvers, with a complete lack of any aerodynamic control surfaces. For a pilot whose entire life is governed by the rigid, predictable laws of aerodynamics, seeing this firsthand is an abrupt, worldview-shattering event. And the shared aftermath for these witnesses is just striking. Whether you're surviving an ancient sensory ordeal or you're tracking a modern UAP on a radar screen, as a witness, you are left fundamentally altered. People from both eras describe this specific post-encounter vulnerability, a complete stripping away of their previous reality. They feel kind of alienated from ordinary society because they've seen behind the curtain. It leaves them disoriented, sure, but also plugged into a vastly more complex, deeper cosmic order.
So, when we are faced with something that is completely unexplainable, how do we even begin to decode it? It is genuinely fascinating to contrast the ancient reliance on sacred, metaphysical architecture against our modern obsession with strict, empirical data collection.
For the ancient schools, they built this brilliantly unified metaphysical system. They fully integrated geometry, astronomy, acoustics, and philosophy, operating on the belief that the physical universe simply is not separate from the divine. For them, Pythagorean math and Platonic solids weren't just abstract equations on a chalkboard. They were viewed as the literal source code of the underlying spiritual reality.
On the flip side, our modern approach really couldn't be more different. We try to interrogate UAPs through a very rigid, materialist lens. We use infrared targeting pods, like FLIR, and radar returns to collect multispectral telemetry. We are absolutely desperate to quantify these objects. But here's the paradox we run into. Our modern science is trying to use conventional engineering tools to measure something that fundamentally defies conventional engineering, which creates this completely fascinating intellectual paradox that we can call the esoteric loop. Because as modern physicists hit the absolute limits of space-time navigation, the discourse inevitably circles back on itself. Modern investigators are now throwing around terms like interdimensional mechanics, non-human intelligence outside of linear time, and consciousness-coupled interfaces. We are effectively pushing hard materialist science right back into the ancient metaphysical territory we confidently thought we had outgrown. But to be fair, there is a massive point of divergence here that we need to acknowledge. Ancient schools use their mysteries essentially as stabilizers. Their secret knowledge bound rulers to a shared framework, which strongly reinforced social cohesion among the elite. The modern UAP framework, though, it is a massive disruptor. By forcing governments to finally admit there are physics-defying objects in our skies, UAPs are actively challenging the state's absolute monopoly on technology and airspace. And really, this big divergence comes down to the nature of the threshold itself. Ancient mystery schools were highly proactive. They'd carefully and deliberately invited chosen initiates across the threshold to learn their secrets. The modern UAP phenomenon, however, is entirely reactive. These anomalies have unceremoniously breached our perimeter completely uninvited, forcing massive defense apparatuses into a scrambling, reactive posture of desperate containment.
Which leaves us with one final, incredibly profound thought. Both of these frameworks show humanity grappling with the absolute limits of our comprehension. Whether it's an ancient initiate standing in a temple or a modern pilot sitting in a fighter jet cockpit, we are standing before a paradigm that totally shatters our ego. The big question you should take away from this explainer today is this: how will we adapt? And how will we ultimately humble ourselves when the universe proves to be vastly more complex than our current models allow? Thanks so much for exploring this with me.
Now available exclusively on Amazon Kindle eBooks, Rhizome Summer 2026, a collection of essays, Rhizome Fall 2026, Book 2.